Those can't. Are we recording everywhere?
Yeah, we're good.
Welcome to the Piece of Us podcast. You're supposed to say it.
Max is being the host today.
Am I the host?
Yeah.
I have no idea what we're talking about today.
We thought we'd try Max saying the intro because apparently Crystal's voice cracked last week.
Last week I cracked.
Well,
All right, introduce
welcome.
yourself.
My name is Max. This is my grandma. Her name is Joanne.
Yeah, I think
I always call her grandma though, so I'm not too.
we call her grandma or mom on the vlogs, and people didn't know your name for the longest time.
That is true.
But they're figuring out. Her name is Joanne, guys. She is our special guest today, and I'm super excited because she has an incredible story to share and so many life lessons that it's just, I really admire your strength. And so we're going to hear all that today, and I'm super excited about that. My name is Crystal, by the way.
I'm Aaron.
And we got Aaron next to me, my amazing husband that's doing No Shave November. So he's.
It looks good on him.
A lot of people in the comments are like, keep it.
I got a brush, and so I brush it every morning.
He was brushing
now.
it this morning. It was the cutest thing.
That's funny.
It's starting to get to that soft point where it's not like itching me all the time, so I'm super excited.
So are you going to keep it?
I don't know yet.
Dude, it looks good on you. You should keep it.
Well, here's the thing, like going into No Shave November, I've never had like a straight razor shave. You know, you always watch these gangster movies like Goodfellas and whatnot, and it's always about the gangsters getting these straight razor shaves. Not saying I'm a gangster or anything like that, but I always thought that it would be cool to get a straight razor shave. And so I thought, why not grow it out all November? And then on December 1st, I'll go and get a really good straight razor shave from a barber. And yeah. So I'm looking forward to that experience, but now I might keep it. And so I'm like, what do I do?
All right, well, let's start into this. I'm so excited. Okay, so explaining a little bit about your past, because there's so much stuff to dive into here. But let's start with, so how many kids did you have? So, and where was I in that role?
Okay, I had 6 kids, and the first 2 are girls. Shelly's the oldest, and then there's Mindy. She came about 5 years later, and then there was Michael. He came about 16 and a half months later, and then we have Crystal, and she was 2 years later after that.
Okay, so let's stop right there. There are 2 more that joined the family a little bit later, but there was 4 children that you had with my biological dad.
That is correct, yes.
So at that point, were you guys wanting to have a 5th, or kind of where were you guys in the process after I was born?
Okay, when you were about 10 months old is when we found out that your dad had cancer. He had kind of flu-like symptoms. And we lived in a small town, so the doctor was available anytime. And so I took him in after 2 weeks because he was still throwing up, not be able to eat food or hold anything down. And the doctor looked at him and says, it's just the flu, just go home. So he was able to eat for a couple days, and then all of a sudden he started in again. And I was like, this is the flu again. And he was throwing up, and all of a sudden he just passed out on the bathroom floor. And it scared me. So I got on the phone, called my doctor, and says, hey, I said, he just passed out on the floor. I can't pick him up. What should I do? And he says, Joanne, when he comes to, bring him to me right away. So I stuck him in our van, and I took him to the doctor. The doctor came out to the car, and he looked at him, and he touched his stomach, and he says, oh, my goodness, he's really extended. You need to go to the hospital immediately. So I had all of my kids with me, so we went to the hospital immediately.
So you had a 10-month-old, well, that was me,
Yes.
all of these little kids, and you were taking him to the doctor. You didn't have any help in that moment?
No, because I really wasn't thinking it was serious.
Yeah.
And so we just headed to the hospital. It's about a 45-minute drive. And so we got there, they went in, did all their examining and everything, and then they said we have to do exploratory surgery. There's some kind of blockage, but we don't know what. So I said, okay. So I had Shelly in the waiting room holding the kids. So she was taking care of you, plus her.
And how old was she at the time? She was 11, I think? Or maybe younger than that.
She was younger than that. She was 9.
Well, well, yeah, her and I are 8 years apart. Yeah. So if I was 10 months, she was probably around 9 years old.
Yeah.
Wow. I can't imagine as a 9 year old taking care of my three siblings while my dad was in there having surgery. And I'm sure you were really stressed out.
I was.
So where did they diagnose or how did they diagnose his
So
cancer?
then after that, they did the surgery. We're sitting out there waiting, and finally the doctor comes out and he says, hey, we're going to have to take a biopsy, but he did have a blockage in his colon. We cut away as much as we could, but we're not sure if any got past the wall. And so we won't know until it comes back. And then all of a sudden over the speaker, cold blue, and it was your dad. And so he took off
What?
running, and I'm like, what's going on? What's the cold blue? Did he quit breathing? What's happening? And so when they got back there, I guess he had a seizure. And so they had to put him in ICU immediately, and they were able to bring him through. But then the doctor came back out. By this time, I'm just a nervous wreck. It's getting late at night. I have all of my kids, and I'm trying to pull it together. And the doctor's like, it wasn't good. He had a really bad seizure, and we're not sure if he's going to be able to walk again. He's going to be paralyzed from his waist down. And I was like, what? And this is going through your mind and everything. And there was a nurse there that was really, really, really kind. She came over to me and she says, would you like to stay at my house and then you can come back in the morning? So she took me and the 4 kids. At that time, I think my mother-in-law showed up, but I don't quite remember. But I remember going to her house. My kids were just starving. She gave us a little bit to eat, and I did not sleep at all that night. I was so worried. So the next morning, we went back over, and
Real quick, what an incredible experience for a random stranger. So the nurse, you didn't know her personally,
did.
correct? And whenever, I don't know, and I think about this a lot when I'm out in public in different places, like you don't know what the person next to you is going through. And so for her to take you in and feed us and all of that, and just this random stranger to really hold your hand through that was incredible. That's actually the first time I've heard that story. And
That's
I'm
the
over
first
here
time.
almost in tears, and
Yeah.
I'm trying not to cry on the podcast. This is going to be our first crier episode.
I should have grabbed more Kleenex.
Okay, sorry. Continue on. So you got back to the hospital.
And so she was still on shift. She just ran us. She lived across the hospital, so she just ran us to her house and just let us in. And she went back to the hospital. And then the next morning, I gathered up all the kids and we went. And I did tell my mother. She lived in Las Vegas at the time. So my sister and my mom and dad both came in. So by the time the next morning, they were there so they could help with the kids. So I went in there. We're in ICU. He's not quite awake yet. And I'm just so, so worried. I was like, what are we going to do if he is paralyzed, And so he finally does come to. And a few days later, I could talk to him. And he ended up not being paralyzed, any symptoms. He came out of it. They said it was just really weird for as bad as it was. And so we were able to go home. And then they called us a few weeks later and said that it was cancer.
What stage did he get diagnosed at that? Do you remember?
Well, this was in the 80s, so they didn't really put a stage on it.
There wasn't stages back then.
No. And because I was in a small town, didn't know much of what was going on, they were like, well, why don't we just wait and see if it comes back? And if it does, then we'll do chemo, we'll do everything else. So, not knowing that much about cancer, I was like, okay. And opened him up because they weren't sure what was going on.
Oh my gosh. So even the recovery from that, let alone to still have cancer,
Yes.
but not know it at that point,
Right.
is really difficult, especially with 4 little kids. Like, when I had Max and Hallie, when they were just little, well, even 10 months old and Hallie was 2, that was a struggle. Like they're running around at that age and they're kind of into
Yes.
everything. And Max loved to break things and he was a little wild child,
Yeah, it was a wild child.
but so I can't imagine 4 at that point with a sick husband. So I really admire your strength through that, because you're
Thank
really
you.
incredible with that.
All these stories really do hit home, though, to think, like, because I'm named after him and I have the same birthday as him. So I just feel like more connected. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I feel like you were like the gift from him, from God. And, because we had decided to have another baby. And then all of a sudden I was like, no, 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 let's wait a little bit longer. And when we decided we were going to wait, I was already pregnant. And yeah, and then Max ended up being born on my dad's birthday. So we named him after my dad, Max. And
So I think
so,
the interesting to note is he actually had a due date of like March 11th.
Oh,
yeah, it
really?
was something like that.
Yeah.
That's actually 2 days away from Hallie's. No.
So
Wait,
Max
right?
was like,
That's like 2 days away from
No, no,
Hallie's.
no.
it may not have been that
It was like
late.
March 1st or something. He was only born a couple weeks
Didn't
early.
Shelly, like, didn't you guys go on a run that morning?
Oh my
trying
gosh. So
to-
my sister Shelly came over the morning of February 14th. I was already feeling off. I think I was already in labor, but she was like, we're going to walk. This baby's being born, because she knew I wanted to name you Max. And so we went on a short walk, and I was like, yep, he's coming today. So yeah, just really cool. But okay, so from when he got diagnosed to,
Well, I'm glad
The
that
struggle.
you named him Max, but to tell you the truth, it was really hard when you chose that name
it was.
because it brought up so many memories. But I worked through them and
Oh
tried to
no,
accept-
you never told me that.
I know, because how do you tell your kids? It was an honor that you wanted to name him after your dad, but it was hard to hear the name.
Hard to hear the name Max for a while.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then for it to come on his birthday, wow.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
had to be a rough day.
It was.
Oh my gosh. That's
So then, about 7 months later, we went in for an appointment, and they said that the cancer was back. And so they sent us to Flagstaff, and we did a CT scan. And they wouldn't even do it. They said that they could see the cancer out the rectum. And so they sent us away, and between the little ultrasounds and everything, they found 2 tumors that were by his kidneys that were shutting off because he wasn't able to go to the bathroom. So they put the stents in, and then they did, I think it was called like hypothermia, where they put you in this tank and they center right where the tumor is. And they heat it up and it just kills, okay?
oh.
And so we went for about 3 months to Tucson. So I packed up all the kids and we went there, and he wasn't able to move much. He did have a bag outside of his that I had to change, pretty often. And we just found this kind of like a cheap motel. It had a little kitchen in it and everything. And every day we went for treatments, And I could tell that was really hard. And we happened to be next to a guy that wasn't the pleasantest. Here I am just upset and having a hard time with all the kids, and he would party all night. And so then I'd try to keep the kids asleep, and then during the day if they cried, he would bang on the wall and just yell and everything like that. And we were like, what? And I remember one time going down to do laundry, and I had Max laying on the bed. And then I came back up, and I'm there for about 20 minutes, and all of a sudden I got a knock at the door, and he called the police on me, telling me that I abandoned my children. And I was like, what? I said, you're welcome to come in. My husband's laying on the bed. He has cancer. We're here for treatment. He came in. He apologized and left, but he said he's going to have to turn me into DES. And so then I had to go through that to show that I was a fit mother. So I thought that was kind of...
That is so sad.
It was. And the guy was so bad. I was in the elevator with all the kids, and he just laid on into me, and just started yelling at me and telling me I was white trash and everything like that. So I went to the office, and I says, hey, I'm having a hard enough time. I can't handle this. Can you move us to another room? This guy is just being ridiculous. So they did. They moved us to a completely
good.
room, and then it was better.
Oh my gosh, how sad.
That was hard on top of everything else I was going through. And so then we went through all the treatment and the tumor shrunk. So we went back to the doctor and they're like, okay, he's healed. And we're like, what? He goes, yes, he's healed. The tumors are gone and everything. But me and your dad, the more that we talked, we could feel in his incision that there was a lump. And we asked him about it, and they said it was scar tissue, not to worry about it. And I was like, okay. But in both of our minds, we did not feel that he was healed, even though the doctor said that he was. And so as time went on, he got to where he could not eat. And so then I took him back to the doctor, and they did another CT scan. And what they didn't realize at the time, it had vined out through the whole body. So yes,
Oh
he
my
did have those
gosh.
tumors, but his whole body was just full of it. So when they opened him up, that's when they discovered it, because they had to do another surgery, and they just closed him up immediately. And when air gets to cancer, it grows more fast.
Right.
So we never gave up hope. We always kept thinking there was going to be a miracle, that he was going to be okay. He had all these kids, and so when they told us, right before they told us that he was healed and everything, we sat down and we talked about it, and we wanted to have another baby. Well, we both prayed about it, and we both got the same answer, not to. And we were thankful, but at the time we did not know, because the cancer was back and was really full through the whole body. So we were kind of thankful, because we would have just barely had another baby and he would have passed away, or,
Oh, that would have been even more difficult.
it would have. And so a few days before Christmas, he went into the hospital. And they thought that if they starved him enough, that it would break loose the scar tissue. At that time, they didn't realize it was through the whole body. And so he was in there. He hadn't ate for about 2 or 3 days. And it was Christmas. And I didn't want to open any of the presents. And I told the kids, let's all get in the truck, and we're going to Sholo. And that's about 45 miles away. And it was snowing. And I took the 4-wheel drive. And we get to the hospital, and I put them all up on the bed, and they were talking to their dad. And the doctor came in, and I guess he felt bad for us. And he says, this is the most saddest thing I've ever seen. And I was like, well,
Gosh.
we don't want to have Christmas until he can come home. And he goes, if you promise to go home and don't eat and come back the next morning, we'll let you go home for Christmas. And he said, okay, I can do it. So we got to bring him home. We were all so excited. We had a really nice Christmas. I had all the kids around. They're opening their presents, and everybody's happy. And he did not eat or drink, nothing.
I feel like
And-
at pretty sure the 4 day mark or the 3 or 4 day mark of starving yourself, I'm pretty sure it gets easy after like the second day. I'm pretty sure second and third day are the hardest days. So
But doesn't your body all start to shut down? I mean, nowadays they would never say starve yourself, right? I mean, I
probably
don't
not
know.
now. That's probably not a good strategy.
But I think that back then they didn't have all the technology and all the research done that they do nowadays.
there's still like water fasting though, so it's kind of
Oh my gosh, though. That's just
that's a sad
heartbreaking.
Do
story.
that on Christmas with 4 kids. Oh my goodness.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
But we were excited. He was home.
Oh, I'm sure.
I know.
And so he was laying on the couch, and he goes, hey, why don't you go down and get gas so that we'll be ready for in the morning when we go back? And I said, okay. So I got in his truck, and it was snowing and everything, and went down, got gas. I came back, and I was holding onto his truck because it was really slippery, and I didn't want to fall. And when I looked down, because I was watching my feet to make sure I didn't step on any ice, I saw a reflection. And I looked up, and the truck's on fire. And
What? That took a crazy turn.
So I went running inside the house. I says, Max, your truck's on fire. What do I do? He jumps off the couch. He runs out, grabs the fire extinguisher, throws open the thing, and gets it out.
Wait, why did it start on fire out of nowhere?
I am not sure, but it was scary. So we had to take another vehicle. But one of our neighbors, he came over and took the truck without us. Well, we kind of knew, and he just fixed it free for us because he felt bad for us.
I was like, you were hitting rock bottom with cars on
Yeah.
fire, struggling
Holy.
with the
I
illness.
know.
Oh my gosh.
So got up the next morning and we took him into the hospital, and there he stayed. I did have a sitter. I don't know if you remember, but the neighbor across, she used to come over and watch you whenever I needed a sitter at the last second.
Yeah, I don't have any memory of all of that.
So she came over and watched the kids. And so during the day, I'd go to the hospital. She'd watch them, and then I'd come back and everything. And about 3 days after Christmas, they decided to send him to Tucson to that hospital. And so he just calls me up. He says, "They're releasing me, so you've got to come now." And I was like, "What?" So I called my mother-in-law and I says, "Hey, they're releasing Max. We have to drive him because we couldn't afford an ambulance." And they gave us the option, as long as he didn't eat or drink, that we could drive him to the hospital, to the ER. And so we said, okay. And so she packed a bag. I packed a bag for all the kids. Tisha was sitting there helping me, putting everything in the suitcase, not knowing how long we're going to be gone because we're still on winter break. And I get all the kids in the car, and we're going through the Salt River Canyon, and it's snowing pretty good and everything. And I'm not real good in the snow. And so your dad, right before we went in the Salt River Canyon, he made me pull over, and he wanted to drive himself to the hospital. And I was like,
What?
"This is not a good idea." And he goes, "It'll be fine. It'll be fine." So my mother-in-law, Vinny, said, "Just go ahead. Let him drive." So I let him drive, and we're driving down through the canyon. There was only one scary point. We hit some black ice, and the van did kind of spin, and there was a car coming right head towards us. And we all just closed our eyes thinking, well, this is going to be over. But we didn't hit the car. But it was scary.
Oh my gosh.
And so we make it to the hospital down in Tucson. And there it was just kind of like a nightmare. She stayed into the room with us because they wouldn't let the kids in. Sometimes, because I was still nursing Crystal at the time, so sometimes they would let me in there when I would nurse her, and she'd go to sleep and let her lay in my arms. But if she got up or woke up, then they made me take her out immediately. So we had to buy a stroller for her to sleep in. And
Isn't this the hospital that gave him blood poisoning? That made it just go downhill from there?
yes, it did. Because then they realized that it was so bad that there was nothing that they could do. And we were there for 19 days. And so when school started back up, I had to send Shelly and Mindy back down with a friend. And Debbie Hall watched them for them to go to school. And then I had Michael and Crystal with me. And he had an IV that went bad in his arm. And I showed the nurse, I said, "Hey," I said, "it has a little line right here." And she goes, "Okay." So they came in and put another IV in. Well, they did not take the needle out, which I didn't understand. And so Max was a little concerned. He goes, "Look, the line's getting bigger." So it started traveling up his arm. And so I went running out in the hallway, and I said, "Hey, you guys need to take this IV out." And then all of a sudden he started having a seizure. And they come running in, and I mean, it was so violent. I sit there, and I was crying. I didn't know what was happening. And they stuck a pill underneath his tongue to get him to come out of the seizure. And,
Yeah, we know exactly what that pill is. We've had to give that to Aurora before.
and he was so scared. And so then they pulled it out. And that did give him blood poison because they waited too long. Well, my stepdad was there at the time too, and he was yelling at him. And we had very nice treatment after that. They went out of their way because they kind of knew that they messed up. And then he caught pneumonia. And I said, "You know what?" I said, "Just get him to where we can travel in him. I'm going to take him home, and he can just pass away at the house." Because it was too hard. I had 2 kids 4 hours away, and then I had, about 2 hours away. And then, no, because I was clear in St. John's. And then I also had him there in the hospital and these 2 kids. And it was hard with a baby and try to take care of her needs and be in there. It got to where Vinny would stay at night and I would be there during the day so that we could take turns that somebody was
So
with.
Vinny is is my dad's mom. So your
Yes.
mother-in-law.
Yes. So then it finally came to a time that we could take him home. So we were excited. I went and got Shelly and Mindy from the babysitter after we got home and made him a bed on the couch because he couldn't really sleep in the bed. And they told me what to expect. And I said, okay, that he'd go into a coma and then he would just pass away. And the coma could last like 2 or 3 days and then he's gone. I was like, okay. So he was talking, he was alert, he was even eating. And somebody brought over some fish for him to eat and he just loved it. So he decided that we would bundle up and we would go to the Concho Lake and he wanted to go fishing and get another fish. So he bundled all up and we went to get fishing. So, but he didn't catch anything and it was so hard on him for him to stay awake. And so he was like, this isn't working. So I took him back home. And then the doctor called and they says, let's do chemo on him. And I was like, what? So I told Max about it and he's like, okay. So we went over, they did a blood transfusion because it's 45 miles to the hospital. And they wanted to do chemo. Well, he could only do one treatment. And then it was too hard of a trip, the 45 miles over to the hospital. But when they did the blood transfusion, it made him have more energy. He was able to sit up. And one thing that he really enjoyed is he enjoyed all of the kids. He had you guys dancing around him, and he just always wanted his kids around him all the time. And you guys just loved to sing and dance to him.
Aw. So how long from when he got diagnosed to when he passed away? Because it sounds like a lot of ups and downs, and I know you had mentioned that you guys stayed hopeful through the whole thing.
We did.
So how long was that time frame?
About a year and a half.
A year and a half. That's not a lot of time
No.
between diagnosis to actually
So what, you were 2?
passing away. Yeah, I was 2 years old. And I know the story that you've told me a lot is after he passed away that he used to be the one to put me to bed at night. And he read me books and all of that. And so for the longest time, I just cried and cried to sleep. Was that an accurate story?
It was. I wanted to quit nursing because you were getting older. And so he says, okay, let me help you. You stay in the bedroom and I'll put her down. And he would give you a cup and you'd throw it and you'd scream. And he'd say, don't talk, Joanne. And I would be like, okay. But it was so hard when your kid's on the other side just screaming her head off, wanting her mother. So he started reading stories to you. And he did this for about 2 weeks, as much as that he could. And you loved it. It took you a little while before you accepted your dad putting you in sleep, but it did work. And the kids just kind of ran around, and there was times that he did go into a coma, and he was like that for 2 days. And so I called the doctor, and I says, what do I do now? And he says, it won't be long now. And then the next day, he's up talking, and I'm just like, okay, what does that mean? And then I call the doctor. I says, now he's up talking. And he's like, okay, then. He guess he was just sleeping. I don't know. And I was like, so there was so much that I just didn't know. And,
And I'm sure an emotional roller coaster
oh,
with all of that.
it was.
So a lot of you guys have written in about being on the podcast, and a lot of people wrote in about talking about loss and what that looks like, what that feels like. How do you overcome loss? Because I know, at least in our house, when kids come from foster care or adoption, there's a huge part of loss in there.
Yeah.
Whether losing their biological family, losing siblings sometimes, losing their friends. And there's just so much that goes into that. And so we've kind of learned different coping skills and, just in our household. But I can't imagine being a young parent, because how old were you when he...
I was 28.
So 28 years old with a, husband that's passed away and 4 little kids to raise. How did you handle that loss?
It was hard at first. Mindy was in kindergarten, and when we'd get together before we go to bed, you would cry. You wouldn't let me hold you for 2 weeks. You would just lay on the floor and just scream. And it was so hard to watch you scream because you wouldn't even let me comfort you. And you just kept saying, "Want my daddy, want my daddy." It was so hard. And so then I'd go put the other kids down in bed, and you're still screaming, and I'm trying to hold you, and you won't let me. So I go in my room, and I'm crying and listening to you cry. And then finally, you'd quit crying and go to sleep, and then I'd go in and pick you up and put you in your bed. And so that was extremely hard. Um, the other kids, like, they would never leave me alone. They had to go from the bathroom, the kitchen. Whenever I'd get up and move, all the kids came because they did not understand. And Michael would run through the house, "Where's my daddy? Where's my daddy? He was on the couch. Where is he?" And he was 4 at the time. And he couldn't understand when they took him because I guess I was in shock. And I remember the house being full, and my mother in law was there. She called, and he come in and he says, "Mom, Dad's gone." And I was like, "Dad's gone." And that was because he had passed away and they'd come to get his body. But I really don't remember a lot of it because it was hard on me. But I just remember the kids, and somebody stayed there and helped me with the kids. And they were still screaming and asking where he is. And Mindy was in kindergarten, and I was in a carpool, and one of the mothers overslept and forgot to pick her up. And the school called me and says that Mindy's laying on the floor, hysterically crying and scared. And I was like, "Okay, I'll be right down." So I went down, and I got myself out of that carpool because I could tell it wasn't good on Mindy, because then she even was more clingy because she was so afraid that wherever her dad went, I was gone. Because it's really hard to explain to kids. They don't quite understand it.
Right. They're probably just feeling abandoned versus a death and
Yeah.
kind of trying to make that process.
So every morning she'd look at me and she'd shake her finger at me. She said, "Okay, now you stay home and you wait for me. You don't go nowhere."
Oh, that's
And
Oh
so
I'd
yeah,
be
that's
like,
hard.
heartbreaking.
"I will be right here when you get home from school." So, yeah,
Is
that
there
was
a
really hard.
certain point where, because I know obviously when you go through a big trauma, a lot of it can be blocked out in your mind. It feels like you're just kind of living an out of body experience. Is there a certain coping skill that you learned, or was there a turning point when, or that helped you work through that grief?
Um, it was It was super hard. Even like 6 months after he was gone, if a car pulled up into the driveway at night, all the kids would get up and say, "Dad's home." And they'd run to the door. And your heart just sinks. And then they'd come back, and I said, "You guys, he's not coming back." But the kids never gave up hope that he was going to come back. And I know Shelly, my oldest, took it the hardest. And she was in school, and I had read a story to her, and it's from the Bible of Lazarus being raised from the dead. You know, they'd called for Jesus to come, and he hadn't come for a while, and he ended up raising him. And so when I read this to Shelley, I guess she took it literally, and I went to the school called me and said they needed to see me. And Shelly came running over to me and says, Mom, I messed up. I quit doing my work until they brought Dad back to life." And I was like, "What?" And so I was able to talk to the teacher and explain. And they told Shelly that if you go home and I'll give you time, like, and catch up on all your work, and you won't be behind, because the teacher felt really, really bad. So that was really hard, but I was really thankful that the teacher took Shelly and we helped her to get caught up. And she realized, hey, I guess he's not coming back. So each of the kids kind of went through a hard time wanting their
I
dad
know
back.
you had told me a story once that you had gone to the doctor and the doctor had told you you're basically killing yourself. What advice did he give you? I remember you telling me about this story, and I know it's made a difference in kind of some ways that I deal with, trauma in our own house. But
It was hard. I thought that I was handling everything and I was doing the best that I could, but there was days that I wouldn't get out of the bed. And having a 2-year-old running around, I only took care of your needs, but I really wasn't there for you. But I tried. And my brother-in-law would come into my room and he'd be like, "Joanne, you got to get up." And I'm like, "I can't." And I just felt like a piece was missing. I had this emptiness. I had this um, oh, I don't even know how you describe it, like a big old lump in your stomach. I wasn't eating, um, but I didn't realize any of this because I had taken it really, really, really hard. The nightmares were bad at night. I could kind of suffer during the day because you keep yourself busy enough, but at night it would be just like I just cry and cry and wake up screaming. And I had to go for my physical. And so I went to my doctor and they did my vitals and everything. And he just comes into the room and he goes, "Did something happen bad in your family? Did you lose somebody or what? Something happened?" And I just looked at him like, how could he tell? And he says that, I said, "Well, I lost my husband about a year ago." And he says, "Oh my goodness." He says, "You're killing yourself. You're slowly dying inside. You have got to quit." So we sat down and we talked about eating, and I told him that I haven't been able to eat much. I eat a couple bites and it doesn't taste good and I throw it away. And he says, "I want you to try exercising, moving more, and seeing if that can help you." So at the time, the kids were in tumbling and in gymnastics, and I was talking to the teacher, and she says they're going to have a class afterwards that's going to exercise class for adults. And I was like, "Oh, maybe I should do that." So I signed up, and there was times that I had a hard time going to the class. I would try to make up every excuse like I didn't feel like it, but I started going, and the more that I went, it's just like I felt this heaviness in me start to slowly leave my body. And I started eating better and gaining my weight back. And
so exercising, because it does release endorphins.
to this day, I still do. I get up every morning and I go for a walk because I remember that feeling and I know how important it is to the body and to your mental health and your physical health.
Definitely.
For as long as I've known you, you've been a walker, and I'd never understood where that started. But it's so interesting to hear that.
Plus, being a single mother, sometimes I would put them in bed and tell Shelly I'm going for a walk. She never understood, but I needed that time just to get out there, and it just helps you to face things. At least it did for me in my life.
That's a really good coping skill. I know when I'm feeling really stressed. I just did it the other night. I was stressed about something, but I just went out and walked.
It
You just
helps.
walk.
I do it.
Sometimes I pace, but we're trying our best here.
The bad thing in St. John's is that I talk to myself while I'm out walking like, ah!
How long did it take you to like get back into like dating or get back into it? Because I've heard some stories and
Um, it was well over 5 years. I
Yeah.
really couldn't even look at another person or even think that. I mean, even the bishop of my church would say, don't you believe in getting remarried?" And I'm like, "No." No. I felt like I was being unfaithful, even though I knew that I wasn't. I got married really, really young, and we were married for 12 years. So that's kind of I knew. So it was super hard for me. My first time of even going is this guy in my town talked me into going to a singles conference in Thatcher. And I was like, okay. And so after a while of him talking and everything, and then when it came down to leaving, he canceled. And here I was already had paid for it and everything. And so I went with this other lady, and that was hard. It was a fun conference, but it was a hard conference. I remember they had a dance, and anytime I'd see a guy walking my way, I would leave and I'd go out in the parking lot, go to my car, pull out my picture of Max. I know
Oh,
that
that's
this.
so sad.
I'd say, I can't do this. I can't do this. And I'd cry for a little while, and then I'd go back into the dance. And as soon as somebody approached me again, I was out in the parking lot. I think I spent more time out in the parking lot. I just couldn't do it.
So 5 years before you started dating again, 8 years before you got remarried.
Yes.
And so I was 11 at the time, and I know I talked about this in our other podcast a little bit, but that ended up being a really bad situation. And I think because for me, growing up in that situation or with a single mom, I didn't realize because I don't remember all the grief and all the sadness because I was 2 years old. But I do remember being like 8, 9, and you were just starting to date. And I was like, why? Because you seemed happy all the time. To me, like in my perspective, you were always very positive. And I remember you just laughing all the time and taking us to the park and playing games. And you were very active with me through my childhood, at least from my memory. Um, and so when you started dating, it was really difficult for me. And I remember being like, we don't need a dad. Like, we don't need, because I was so happy just with our current family situation. So, and then when you got married, so how long did you guys date before you got married?
Well, in that Thatcher conference, I ended up meeting a guy there, and that was okay. I know he did come to the house. He had 4 kids, and I
I
had
do
my
remember
four.
that.
Okay, and it was funny because he did catch me when I was going out to my car during the dance, and he asked me to dance, and I danced one dance with him, and then he says, "Will you go get a slush with me after the dance?" And I was like, "Okay." And I had my hand on the door handle, and I noticed he had his hand on the doorknob, and like we were gonna bell any minute. So it was really hard, but he was really a nice guy. He had been divorced only 6 weeks, so he had a lot that he was still going through, and I had a lot that I was going through. But he did come up a couple times and see me, and then we just kind of broke it off. He wanted something else differently, than which it would have been hard with 8 kids. I remember being overwhelmed when all the kids got together.
Yeah. It was a lot. I remember going up for, I want to say it was Thanksgiving or something, and being
Yes.
around his family. So it was a new family, new siblings, like, and I just remember feeling like it was so weird. But
So Shelly was probably what 18, 19 at that point that
Shelly
she
had moved
remarried.
out and was not
Yes.
at home at that point.
Yes, Shelley was gone.
So
Yes.
you never dated through
She was married.
Shelly's.
She was there when was there. She was dating at the time, but they didn't get married. And when asked me to marry him, I couldn't say yes. I said, "Can we give it another 4 months?" And then I think that's what kind of turned him off. But maybe that was the best. If they're not willing to wait for you, they're probably not the right one.
That's true.
Because I was super scared. I didn't know if I really wanted to do that because we would have had to move to New Mexico and Plias. And I was uprooting my whole kids, my whole family, and I was just like, I can't do it. I can't do it. So we kind of ended that. Then I went to another conference, and that's where I met that I did get remarried.
So she got remarried, and it was really short relationship, and he ended up being extremely abusive.
Yes.
Did you know in that situation, did you know early on, like right after you got married, or did it take you a while? And how did you get out of that abusive relationship at that point?
Well, we got married, and the day after we got married, I started noticing that he was a little off, but I didn't know how off. And I was like, oh my goodness, what did I do? He kind of pressured me into a quick relationship, and we ended up getting married. Well, as time went on, I found out he was schizophrenia, and I got to witness some of the points where he would space out, and his eyes would get glazed over, and we never knew what he was going to do when he was in that. And then he'd come out and be just fine, like he didn't even remember. So that was a little scary. And yes, he was very controlling, very abusive more to my kids than what I realized. I knew he was to Michael, but I never knew that he was to you because you never said anything, which makes me feel really, really bad.
Don't feel bad. I feel like even now I do that with Aaron. Sometimes I'll go through something and I kind of internalize a lot. Like I don't want to bother people around me or I don't want to be a burden. And so a lot of times Aaron will find out stuff like after the fact and he's like, "Why did you not like tell me you were going through that or that you're struggling with that situation?" And I don't know. I think it just comes
Yeah.
from my childhood maybe and I think you were going through so much that I didn't want to be a burden. I was kind of always the quiet like I'll work through this on my own as a kid.
If I
We
had to guess, I mean, hearing the story, of all that you went through as she was growing up, like I can only imagine how you felt in all that time, but you describe it as though she was happy. And I'm sure she was probably far from that, but the fact that she was able to portray this, happy and everything's okay, but actually she was probably really struggling inside.
I think it's a big thing too with just mental health in general. And so many people can smile and they're happy and they're, you know what I mean? They're just look like they're, in the best time of their life, but internally they're in the biggest struggle of their life. And we've had some of our kids that we didn't know at first. I mean, you see little signs and you have
Yeah.
little like, something's not quite right. But then you see them smiling and laughing, and you're like, no, everything's great. Like they seem great. And it's not the case. And I feel like mental health, things like that are the silent killer out there. And we really need to raise more awareness on people opening up and not internalizing all of that because I feel like sometimes you internalize it, it gets too big. And then there's no one that can help you. But there's always someone that can help you. Like there's
Right.
always someone out there that understands what you're going through. And
Yeah, there's always someone out there who's going through some of the exact same things you are. So
That is true. We
yes.
did go through marriage counselor, and after they did everything, they told me that he was schizophrenia, and he refused to take any medication to help handle it, and that this would be the best that he could be. So I had to decide if I could live like that or if I needed to get out. And I said, okay. And then he says, if you get out, I'm going to tell you something. You have to do it privately. Nobody can know what you're doing because he's capable of more than you realize. So that really scared me.
Especially coming from a therapist who normally don't give straight out advice like that.
No. So I saved and saved my money. I parked my car like a mile away from the attorney, went into the attorney and told him the story. He told me to keep a little journal, keep it hidden of all the things that he did. I said, okay. And then he told me to go to 30 miles to another town and get a restraining order for it. And I was like, okay. So I did that. And knowing that he had a hard time with kids, I invited all of the cousins in the car, so I filled up my whole car full of kids.
Knowing he wouldn't want to go.
Ryan, he says, okay, I'm going with you to Springerville. And I says, okay, if you want to go with all these kids. And he said, like, no. And I was like, okay. So I get all these kids in there. And I felt bad. I'm like, what am I going to do with all these kids when I'm in? Because I had to do it without nobody knowing what I was doing. So I dropped him off at a store and snuck out and told him just to roam around in the store. Which I probably shouldn't have, but they were all old enough, And I went down to see the Justice of the Peace to get my restraining order, and they were out to lunch. I was like, great. So I went back and snuck back in the store, and the kids didn't even miss me. They were like, we were trying to find you. Where were you? I was like, in the next aisle. So then I took them to a park. I said, now we're going to play at the park for a while. And they're like, okay. And I said, I have to just go do an errand. So I went back and got my little restraining order. And then I came back into town, and I dropped them off at another park. And I says, you guys get to play here. And they're so excited that they get to play at a park. And I go up to the sheriff's office and give them the restraining order. And they're like, okay, we'll serve him. And I says, but I need to know when you're going to serve him because I don't want to be in the house. He's really violent, and I don't want to be there. His last wife, he held at gunpoint, and the police arrived, and he ripped the phone off the wall, and they could knock him out, and he did not hurt his kid and his wife, but I just didn't want no scene like that. So I went home, waited, and I had a little job at a family history center, and where I volunteered. And I was in there, and the sheriff's office called me and said, "Joanne, we're going to be in your house in 10 minutes." I was like, "You can't. I'm at work." And they like, "You have 10 minutes to get all your kids out of that house." So the guy that was working with me, I says, "I have to go. I have a family emergency." And he was just in the backyard working. And I was like, "How am I going to do this?" So I put my car on the outside of the driveway, ran inside, grabbed children, no shoes on, threw them in the car. They're not knowing
Well,
what.
that's the story I told about
yeah,
the
that's
other
the story,
episode
yeah.
is when I just remember, Crystal, get in the car. And I'm like, I don't know where my shoes are. And I ended up, not. And then I just remember us driving to the desert and sitting there.
Yes.
Was that, like, was
that
it
is
just
the
Dang,
middle of
come
nowhere.
full circle.
right?
on
We
this
were just
podcast,
talking
yeah.
about that story the other day.
That is so true. And because you have to remember back then, there wasn't cell phones, there wasn't anything that we have nowadays. So a rancher, and I ended up being on his ranch, came through the thing, and I had to move my car. And so I went over and told him if he could ask my brother-in-law. So he went and told. Drove out there. I don't know if you remember that. And I jumped in the car, Joe, and nobody knew nothing. And I was telling him the whole situation. And he's like, "Well, I'm not taking you back in town." He's scary, Joe. And everybody was kind of scared of him. And so I was like, "Okay, I'll drive back into town." And I drove back in town, went to my lawyer's office, and he says, "Okay, now I need for you to go home, and you need to stay home so you can't take the baby." And I was like, because he had threatened that if I ever divorced him, that he would take Chelsea and take her into another state and just give her randomly to a stranger.
Oh, yeah. So back up just a little bit. So she did have a baby with him.
Yes.
And that is our younger sister, Chelsea. And so Chelsea was a baby, probably like 2 months old.
6 months old
6
when I
months
left.
old
Yes.
when all of this was happening. So she did have another baby in that situation.
But I needed to get out. It was that bad, but I wanted to get on my feet. And so then I was ready for whatever was going to happen.
So the one story real quick that I remember is, so we had a rock shop in the back of our property, and my biological dad owned a rock business, and
Yes.
he just loves rocks and making them beautiful, and like he just had a whole business with it. And so you guys had built that rock shop, and I remember the police being at our house. Tell me if this story is accurate, because I was 11, and so this is just what I probably know in my mind. But I remember the police being, and I was like, "Why are the police here?" And you're like, "Oh, they want to search the rock shop." And so they were searching the rock shop, and our stepdad pulls in. We probably shouldn't say any names. Um, we'll bleep out the names. If you hear beeps, they're for names. But our stepdad had pulled in. The police went over to his car, and he had a suicide letter sitting next to him on the thing. He had a letter of where my little sister was to go, and then he had a loaded gun.
This is true.
And I remember you sending me over to one of my friends' houses, and you're like, "Okay, we got to get things." And I remember him only going to jail for one night for this.
Yeah, this was after I went back into my property. I had about a half of an acre of land. He was out there waiting when I drove in. But as long as I stayed on my property, I was safe. And there was a guy that helped me, and he says, "I'll deal with him. You go inside with all the kids." And then we went to court, so I had to stay in there, and people would bring me food, my neighbors and everything, because I wasn't allowed off in case he did try to steal.
But do you really feel like restraining orders protect people?
Not really.
Because
Yeah, I don't.
I feel like people get a restraining order, and yes, for the people that are saying and don't want to break the law, like, yeah, it's going to protect, but were you ever scared that that restraining order was just a paper?
Yes, because he could still sit outside of my yard and yell at me and do everything like that. And then as soon as we went to court and I got temporary custody of Chelsea, then he wasn't allowed to take her. Then he was allowed visits. And so that's why he was there. And so one time when he came, he was just so mad that I was divorcing him that he was threatening of being on the back porch and blowing his head off, and then I'd come out and see what I had done, you know. And I told him that if he did that, I just call the police and have them go out and clean you up. I'm not, you know. So I tried to be strong, but he would follow me around in the house and hounding me and telling me that he was going to blow up the whole city block and, you know, just all these threats. And I went to Las Vegas for Thanksgiving, and I took all the kids. And at that time, my parents didn't really know what I had done because I didn't really tell Bonnie or my mom and dad. And so when I was there, called, and so I had to tell them the whole story. Mostly I was scared. I was embarrassed. I thought, how could I have gotten my kids and me into a situation like this? And so when I got home,
Real quick, that thought though, I feel like so many people out there go through. I think when you make choices and you marry someone or you date someone or you choose to have a baby or you choose to even just date and they end up being abusive or being, just not a good situation, so many people blame themselves
yes,
and are embarrassed by it and are just feel like they did something wrong and why did they put themselves in this situation. I don't want people to feel like that, and I
right,
kind of want to go back because I feel like you had blamed yourself for a lot of this, but you didn't know.
I
And a lot of people don't know. And I know there's so many times when we don't follow our instincts, which I think is really, really important to do. But it's okay if sometime, well, not sometimes, but if you end up in a bad situation, it's okay to talk to people about it and it's okay to get out, and you shouldn't feel embarrassed or bad by that because that's something that people go through, and people are really good at deceiving other people sometimes, and it can be a scary situation. And so if you are going through something like that, reach out to somebody that you can trust and don't feel embarrassed because there's no reason that, well, there's a reason, obviously, but at the same time, people are willing to help. And when you know better, you do better.
yeah. And to go back to that situation, when I got home, Bonnie had received a letter in the mail the next day, and it was saying that by the time you get this letter, your sister's not going to be alive. There's not a fit person to raise the baby, but could you take the baby? And everybody else is going to be gone. And it was just a really bad letter. And she read it to me, and I called my attorney and I says, "Do I need to be concerned?" And he says, "Have her fax it to me in the morning and we'll see if there's enough to arrest him." And so they said, "Okay." So she faxed it. They thought there was enough. Now they told me just to go home and wait for him to come and call the police when he does. And so that's the part and they called and said, "Does he have a gun?" And I says, "Yeah, it's out there in the rafters if he didn't take it." I said, "When you guys escorted him out with the restraining order, he did take his pistol with him." And they were like, "Okay." And so they came, and the gun was still up in the rafters. And then that's when he pulled in. So I felt really thankful that the police was there when he arrived because I was so nervous. I was like, here I am watching out the window and making sure, and I have all my kids I'm trying to take care of, so that if he did come, I could call right away because I wasn't sure what state of mind he was in.
Right. This story could have turned out so tragic
It,
had things not fallen into place
it had.
certain ways.
Because when we were carrying the gun out, I looked up and I go, there he is. He just pulled into my driveway. The officer threw the gun against the house, threw it over, tossed it over, and then he pushed me and said, "Get behind the house now." And I was like, okay. So I ran behind the house, and then he approached the truck, and I kind of kept peeking out to see what was going on, and I could see them talking to one another, but I did not hear. And yes, he did have a loaded pistol. He said he was out rabbit shooting, and he had a suicide letter with him and everything. But because he never followed through with it, there was not much they could do. That's why he only spent one night in jail, because you have to go through an action in order to.
It's crazy that they didn't hit him with like conspiracy or something.
I don't know. It's sad too that he only spent one night in jail because he hadn't actually done it. Well, had he actually done it, you know what I mean? It would be a much worse situation. And so that's really sad that that's all that they can do in that point. But Okay, we need to move on to a little bit lighter on the topic. I feel like this is like
Been a heavy one.
this has been a heavy episode, right? Okay, so not that this one is much better, but I feel like you have a million stories. We could do a million of these podcasts with you. So, the final story I want to talk about, though, is your phone call that you got. So, when I was an adult, well, I think I was older. Maybe I was like 16. I don't know. My mom does a lot of genealogy and she does a lot of things about just figuring out ancestors. And I don't know, you have the whole ancestry trees and all of that kind of stuff. One day you got a phone call and someone said, I am your sister.
Well, she first didn't. She just asked questions about family, and she happened to be knew my grandparents, and and so she was getting information and dates and everything. And then she asked me about my family, my sisters, and so she didn't come out on the first conversation. And I was excited. I was like, because I love genealogy. It's really addicting once you get into
So
it.
did she just call and be like, hey, like I found you through genealogy? Like, can we talk?
Well, at that time, we had posted it all online, so it was online. But I had moved from my house and moved to the valley. And so she looked in public records and she found me. And I had a different last name because I had gotten remarried. And that's how she had found me. And so we kind of exchanged numbers. And she said that if she had any other questions, she would call me. And I said, okay. And I gave her my email and, and it wasn't too long after that she sent me an email giving me proof that she was my half sister and that my other sister I grew up with, had no idea, was her sister and only my half sister. And this blew my mind. She had the obituary of my grandpa, she had everything, and I was like, and my mom denied it at first when I asked her. I said, I got a phone call. They want to know if you've ever been married or had any other kids. And she said, no. So I kind of believed her. As a child, you just kind of believe your mother. And so I called Bonnie immediately, read the letter to her, and I says, what do you think? You think it's true? And she goes, I don't know. So we asked my mom, and then she still was like, no. And then she called them on the phone and talked to them, and I think she realized that they were her kids. But she never told us the story, so it kind of died with her.
I know. We kind of have where you guys have all pieced together. So, kind of
Yes.
long story short, um, my grandma, my mom's mom, had 4 kids and she lived in Pennsylvania. Was that right? Pennsylvania area?
Yeah, Michigan,
Michigan,
Pennsylvania,
somewhere up
yes.
there. And it sounds like she was maybe in an abusive relationship too, or some kind of something that was just not a good situation. So she had dropped her kids off. So she had had 4 kids. The youngest was still a baby, and she dropped the 3 older ones off at a babysitter, took the younger one with her, and never came back. And so those 3 siblings got put into foster care and kind of got split up. I mean, there was 2 girls and a boy. The 2 girls were kind of raised a street apart, so they were able to be, raised together, but the boy was lost into foster care system and got adopted out. And so with that, as you guys were all putting these pieces together, the 2 girls had found you guys. And so on my mom's side, she was raised with my Aunt Bonnie, which you guys have seen in some vlogs. But so you and my Aunt Bonnie, and then your older sister, Stephanie. So Stephanie is the oldest sister, and she ended up being your guys' half sister, but a full blooded sister to these other 3 that were out there. And so the story was crazy as they got to go out and meet them in Texas. It was actually on the news and all of that, the whole story of, getting you guys all together, which I thought was incredible. But
But it was really on you and Aaron's reception when you got married that I got to meet my 2 sisters. They came out, and it happened to be at that time, so I invited them to the reception. And here you're running around getting everything. So I couldn't visit them with as much as my mom and my sister could.
oh, that's incredible. I forgot about that.
Yes.
So Yeah, our reception was the first time that you had met your sisters. That's so incredible. I
Yeah,
wonder if I have any pictures. I might have to
You
look.
probably do. You have a
I'm
ton of
sure I
pictures.
do.
we
I'm
do.
sure I
We do because I have some from that night.
Oh, that's so cool. So a few years go by, and you guys finally found your brother.
Yeah, about a let's see, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Um, my niece got us an ancestral test. And so me and Bonnie and my sister Stephanie, we all took it at work. And then I went down and mailed it off. And about a week or two after we got our results back, it came back that we had an immediate family member. We're like, to Stephanie, but not to us. Because me and Bonnie showed we were immediately, and Stephanie was just a close relationship because she was only half. And so we contacted him, and it ended up being Andy's son. And so that's how we found our brother, was through him. So that was
Okay.
exciting.
That's so exciting. I love that when you can find relatives through, ancestry tests and stuff. So they did get to go out and meet him one time. He lives in
Yes.
Michigan. And, but you guys didn't get to spend long up there, right? You only got to see him briefly?
Yes, just for one day, and then we had to fly out the next day. We'd like to go and see him because his health isn't real good. He had a stroke right before he came out to see us. And so he's not able to drive anymore, but he can, walk and talk. But I did lose my other two sisters. My Debbie we lost in January, and then my other sister we just lost the first part of November.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So it was really sad because the other day they had her funeral and they did it virtually and all of that. And you guys were down there watching it. And I walk into the room and Aunt Bonnie's just crying.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm just so worried that I'm not trying to cry on this vlog or on this podcast. But she's like, I'm so worried that we're not going to be able to, see our brother again before he passes. And what a scary thought because you guys didn't even know you had a brother your entire lives
No.
until well into adulthood that yeah, you got to figure all of that out. So,
And I wished my mom could have met him because she would have loved him. He was nothing like his dad because his dad was an alcoholic. She would have just, because she always wondered, did he end up being like his dad, because his dad would take him to the bar and he would sing and get money, and then that's how his dad would drink. And they were living in the car until the police got him and then took him out of there. And that's how he got into foster care.
oh wow. Okay, so he didn't go straight into foster care that
No.
just the two girls did?
No, the father kept taking him. Every time my mom, she wanted out of the relationship because it was so abusive, and he would come and she'd almost lose her job every time he would find her, and he would take the boy, but he would leave the other three girls behind.
Oh, wow. Crazy. One other quick thing with that is so the older sister, Stephanie, she actually found out that she was 2 years older. So your mom had changed her birth certificate. And so when she was an adult, she actually found out she was 2 years older her entire life. She thought she was a different age.
That is crazy.
Imagine finding out you're not the same age that you thought you were your entire life.
Yeah, my mom was running so much, she made herself 5 years older than what she was.
Oh, 5 years?
She was 5 years.
Wait, your mom or your
Holy.
sister?
My mom.
Oh, your mom was 5 years. Okay. And your sister, I thought it was 2 years.
That
Or-
I
yeah,
know
we
that
don't
her
know the
name
whole
was
story.
changed because she went to get her driver's license and she couldn't because she had a different name, and that's how she found out. She did not know she was an Evans and not a Bowden.
Oh, that's crazy. Okay. So, real quick, I got you a little present for coming on the podcast today because I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. You didn't need to.
So, there's a little letter in there and I want you to read it.
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Thank you so much for being a great mom. We have all learned so much from you, and your strength is truly inspiring. Please use these plane tickets to spend time with your brother and create amazing memories. Love you. Oh my goodness! Are you kidding?
No, I don't have them printed off in there, but you do have plane tickets in January to go up and see your brother and spend some time with
Now,
him.
you know he's in Michigan.
Or Michigan, yeah.
It gets a lot of snow there.
That's okay. Plane tickets were really cheap. I wondered why. There's some
May want
fun
to pack
snow
a really
activities.
heavy jacket.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of time though. And I feel like there's never like a right time for things. That's something that I've realized lately is like I always keep putting things off because I'm like, oh, even my surgery coming up, but I'm like, oh, I can't do that because I have this going on or it's this kid's birthday or whatever. But I just feel like it's okay if it snows. It's okay. But that time, those memories that you're going to build together with him, you can just never get back. So
Oh, thank you. He's going to be so excited. We called him when Jackie just passed away, and we were like, we need to get together. We need to see each other. And we asked, how's your health? What is, what's going on? And he was saying that he never got back his eyesight, that if you look through a straw and that he can see through the one part of the straw at the bottom, and that's the only eyesight that he has. So I tried
gosh.
doing that and thinking, no wonder he couldn't drive because he wouldn't be able to see.
to see all around
anything.
him.
But he said he's doing really good, and thank you so much.
You're
This is-
welcome.
This is so exciting.
Now we're gonna go surprise Aunt Bonnie, but on the Crazy Pieces vlog today, so that's gonna be really fun. So no hints to her yet.
Okay.
We have a surprise coming for her. Okay, so before we end this out, I just really want to say thank you so much. But do you have any advice for someone who is currently going through a major loss or grieving and having a hard time pulling themselves out of it?
I know what helps me is to not go there all the time. I know you're going to have little flashbacks and memories of him and things like that. That is good, but I try not to dwell too much on the sadness because it'll kind of overtake your life. So I try to do something that's either active, and I try not to just go there. I try to make myself happy in the situation that I am right now. And
One thing I saw you do growing up that I have carried on, but you're always helping other people. I noticed you kind of get out of yourself a lot, but I knew like if I asked you for anything that you would be the first person to drop everything and be there for me. And so I really admire that about you. But did that help? Does that help like feel better helping other people?
it really does, because there's somebody out there that's a lot worse than what you are, and that helps you to get out of yourself. And so I do regularly right now help people. And it does put me in a better mood and a better position, because then I think, okay, Joanne, yes, you have it hard, but you can still go on. You still have it within you to do it. And going and helping somebody is, yes, it's great therapy.
I love that. And I feel like there's so many stories, though, that we could go on, but I feel like your life has just been a major roller coaster. And I really hope that from here on out that you have nothing but happiness and joy, and that everyone that surrounds you ends up just bringing more light into your life, because you're a huge light to all of us. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to go ahead and end it here. So, this is the Piece of Us podcast. And again, if you would like to be a guest or be a part of this, we have a website called crazypieces.com. And there's a tab called podcast under there, and you can fill out the form. There are so many incredible stories that I've been reading through some of the emails. Some of you may have gotten an email back from either me or Joe has been helping me go through all those.
Got like 850 in like 2 days or what?
Yeah, there was over 1,000 emails, but some of the stories I think are so inspiring, and I'm really excited for them to join us on here and to learn and grow from all of them too. So,
Thank you, Mom, for coming on and joining us. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you all.
and we will see you guys next time. Peace.
Peace.
Or hear you
Peace.
guys next time. I never know how to end a podcast. How do you end it? Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you. I hope it went well.
Yes. Oh, you okay? Oh, I love you. You smell good.
She smells good. I don't know what kind of perfume, but
I hope it came across good and I didn't overshare or
No, I thought it
anything.
was so good. I think it's gonna help so many people just sharing that story because there's so many people out there grieving and just struggling, and so I feel like sharing that is.
I know, even though it's been 34 years, it still feels like it was yesterday.
Oh,
And I still have to kind of put myself in another place all the time.
really?
Yeah, there's little things that trigger, and then I get
Wait,
sad.
so question, does Max act like Max? Or do you see
How
traits
close
in
am I?
him?
Dude, I get the sideburns.
He gets a sideburn. I saw a picture that he had those sideburns. I laugh.
He does have a little bit of his grandpa in him. He does. And maybe because I block a lot, because my other son, Michael, they're all saying he's a spit image of his dad. And I don't see it, but everybody else tells me, and I'm just like, so I think I block a
You
lot
block it all.
because it's so painful
Help you
still.
process it.
I don't know. It's still a process, you know? Every day is a process.